Dirty babe.
Okay, and if you're done, can I start?
Yeah.
Okay.
No
Hi
one
and
makes me
welcome.
feel this way.
Hello and welcome to I think it's episode 7. I think so. Yeah, let's go with that. How are you doing today?
I don't know. I think it's Thursday, but I don't know. Let's go with that. Yeah, could be any day.
I think April started already. I don't know. Are you sure?
No, we're 6 days into April, Hannah. Q2 has arrived as usual.
Q2, man.
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
remembering we did not answer your Q1 question. No, your question on reflecting on Q1.
I know. Yes. Yeah. That's because I had my
Just
motorbike blew up a tire and I didn't make it to the meeting. And I was
oh
just
yeah,
avoiding
that too.
getting my
That
motorbike
too.
fixed. So we'll come back onto that one. Yeah.
Yes, just for context to people listening to us, Jan asked us a few questions about like how was Q1, what did we learn, what were some mistakes and stuff. I think that's what you asked, right?
Yeah, I think it was like well, I had two frameworks in my mind. One was just the past, present, future, right? What have we done in the last quarter? What are we working on now, and what are we looking forward to in the next quarter? And then I also think that we can use the Stratacution framework in terms of saying, what did you care about? What did you create? What issues did you lead on? What have you delivered? And what are you currently reviewing? When you review and reflect, what is that? What's your learnings, insights, etc. I think that could also be a nice one just to structure it.
Okay, that's good. All right. So well, before I begin my questions, just tell us a little bit about your trip because I think some people, maybe 1 or 2 people were listening to us last week and they must be wondering, so what happened to the trip? Your
The which
motorbike
trip? The
trip.
motorbike trip? Oh, it
Yeah.
was awesome. Yeah, I went up to Cameron Highlands. That's what's so cool about Malaysia. You start in this sort of
You did,
very.
and you didn't get me strawberries. And now I'm now upset. I'm upset.
You're not allowed out of the house, Hannah. So
Grab me some strawberries. Okay.
They weren't actually that great. They weren't that into. They were actually quite sour. I was with
Ay, ay,
Nanny,
ay.
and she's a strawberry fan, but she said they weren't great. They weren't that great. But what is cool, for those who don't know, is that Malaysia is a sort of tropical jungle city, right? It's very green, and the minimum temperature here is like, it's cool if it's 25 degrees kind of thing, right? Like it's 30 plus, and then riding on the motorbike up to Cameron, and then in Cameron, it's sort of like a hill station kind of experience, misty, tea plantation. So the temperatures there from like 15 at night, which was cold for me. So it's just an awesome ride on the bike, riding up there. The bike is just fantastic. It's a Kawasaki H2 SX SE for those who are interested. It's an awesome bike, and just unleashing it on the roads to get up there. And then just spent some time there and then came back. And then on the way back, the rear tire popped half an hour away from where I was trying to get to. And that's because the bike just has an obscene amount of torque. It's one of the most powerful bikes in the world. And basically what happens is it just shreds the tire. It literally just shreds all the rubber. And then and then there was no rubber left. So then the inner tube just goes pop. And then I'm doing some speed on the highway. And then I was suddenly very quickly faced with the situation of the rear tire no longer being inflated and rapidly having to figure out what to do. But it all went well. And then was able to get the bike fixed, and I'm healthy and safe. So just a little Monday morning
But were
adventure.
you supposed to like change the tires frequently? Then that's something you didn't do?
I think the mistake that I made was well, there's two factors here. One is I checked the tires before I went on the trip, and they looked okay. And I guess I underestimated how much rubber I would burn, to put it lightly, on the trip. So that was one factor. I mean, I guess it's just a lesson learned, really, and just being careful and cautious about it. I didn't use the bike that much, so that's why I thought, it would be all right. And then the second factor is that the tires are there's different kinds of tires, and these ones are very grippy, so which is good because then the bike really grips the road. But the trade-off is as they grip, they burn rubber. So the rubber burn is higher than normal tires. And so if they'd been normal tires, they would have lasted longer, and how to describe it, there would have been more apparent wearing out of the tire versus just this. Like, I got on the bike, the tires were totally fine, right? 2.5 hours later, it was shredded down. So that just gives you an indication of how much it can do that in a short amount of time.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I think we got a good update. So thank you for that. Let's start
Great.
our first
Okay.
question. All right. So that's something that I've been observing when Oppo or iPhone does this launch of a new product, or even Canva recently did the launch of the new AI features, they go with this big bang, they do a big launch event, they involve KOL, and then you have, it's very traditional, I would say, in the sense of marketing. And then recently you will see OpenAI revealing the plugins, and all they do is a live stream of one developer explaining the feature, and then Midjourney releases new versions, and that's just a how do you call that, Discord update. So what do you have to say about that? Do you think it's because they're in the stealth mode, that's why they're not going big, or is it a new way of launches that you're seeing, a new way of announcing innovations to the world?
Great question. I will just go, yeah, I think what's important to understand is when you're in a corporation, what is so important is the political and theatrical element of work. So it's not just that there's a big product launch, is that I need to make it look good so I look good in the company, right? And the bigger the product launch, the bigger me as a product owner becomes more important in the company, right? And so since we need to do big deal stuff so that I can be paid lots of money and look important and have all this stuff, there's this sort of perverse feedback loop sometimes in organizations where they just consume more and more resource to showcase something that on the surface might be to launch a new product or anything, but actually there's a lot of individuals riding behind that, right, and driving it. I don't want to, I mean, maybe ego, I mean, I don't want to say this in a negative form. I'm not trying to say this as a critical element. I'm just trying to say it as a descriptive element of what happens inside organizations. And so there becomes a need for it to be big. Because, you know, imagine, let's say in 10 years time, hopefully Leadapreneur is even more fabulously successful and we launch a new feature in it. And that, you know, there might be this whole big bang thing, right? We're about to launch a new feature, but we're just going to pop out a video and get on with it. So if we then look at the teams that are building Midjourney, I think you told me Midjourney is 12 people, right? Isn't it? Something like that?
11 team, yeah, 11 packs.
11 people, right? And so, or if you're looking at ChatGPT, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's not that large a company. And so you also there have in that team an engineering discipline, which is we build stuff and get on with it and let it speak for itself. And so I think that's a really important element in the culture of those organizations where they want to, there's much less ego driving in terms of having it to look big and making it a spectacle and get media and marketing, right? Because if you are launching a big new thing like Adobe, you know, how many media impressions you get is a key KPI for someone, right? How many people attend the event? How many, all these things become key metrics that people's salaries and bonuses depends on, reputation, careers, right? So it needs to be bigger. Whereas in these much smaller organizations that are much more engineering focused, and they are just serving that. And I think what that kind of speaks to, you know, is that potential that we're all just getting a bit saturated of these big spectacles. Is the new iPhone being launched or the new Samsung truly world changing? No, mate, it's not. It's really not. It's just, you've just moved the buttons around, so I need to buy a new phone case. And yeah, it is a little bit better. I'm, you know, I'm a big fan of continuous improvement in that sense, but it's not this spectacular thing that needs to be spectacular. And so I think there's this sort of desensitization that we're experiencing where we just don't really care anymore. And we want to just get on with what we're doing. And right now we're using a lot of Midjourney and ChatGPT. So we're very interested in that stream. And when we watch it, we don't need to be bullshitted. Just show me the cool new features. All right. Okay. Now we've got plugins, right? So fantastic. Let's talk about that. Let's see in action. And then we get on with our day. It doesn't have to be this mega spectacle kind of thing. So I think there's something very attractive and endearing, and it builds trust as well in those individuals, because there's this sort of sense of, you know, is this just a colossal amount of bullshit that I'm being told for something that's actually very basic and straightforward? So these guys keeping it real, keeping it simple, I think have an opportunity there to build the trust that people have in their offering and the community that forms around it, and sense of it's a community of practice, and we care about the practice versus we are consumers here to consume the product. And you know, that maybe there's a nice way to sort of end on that thought stream, which is that as we move into Industry 4.0, we'll see more prosumers. That's what we call them at Leadapreneur, right? People who are proactively using and want to be a part of the innovation that they're being participating in, right? So as ChatGPT users, we are, at least some of us, or a significant amount of us, are interested in how does ChatGPT evolve? What are the new features going to be? And we want to participate in it. We don't just want to, it's not like we're just going to be sold a phone and then we leave and then that's it. We don't care. that's an act of consumption. And so that element there in terms of the brand storytelling that they're doing in sharing it in that way, I think speaks to that desire to speak a community, build a community of practitioners around it, ChatGPT users, Midjourney users, and get them engaged in what's real and build trust so that they protect the authenticity of the community. And that's what keeps it alive. Otherwise, you just risk alienating it by just, you have these phrases like greenwashing, right? In the, for example, the sustainability sector, where they just say a lot of blah, blah, but actually it's all bollocks, really. And so in that similar sense, it's easy to just create a lot of bollocks anywhere. But that alienates your community, and it alienates the people who really care and driving your product and participating in it. And that's the most valuable thing, that you have their attention. So I think it kind of honors what matters, and good for them for doing that.
When you mention community of practice, what that reminds me is blockchain. Like, you see a lot of crypto communities, right? And that's what drives the whole cryptocurrency world, I would say. But a question here, there, Jan, what are prosumers? What's the difference between a prosumer and a consumer?
Yeah, great question, right? So there's many ways to unpack this. And I think it's useful to just differentiate that by using the language of Industry 3.0 and 4.0. An Industry 3.0 organization is set up to make the customer or the consumer happy. And what does that person do? They're going to consume something. You're going to go to McDonald's, you're going to buy a Big Mac or a quarter pounder with cheese, right? Some chicken nuggets. You're going to buy a car and you're going to consume it. You're going to buy pretty much anything and you consume it, and that's it. And the nature of the contract is the company makes it, you buy it, so you exchange the good or service for value, right? Money. And then that's it. That is it. You're not involved in how it's made. And you don't care because you just want to consume it. And so, look at, for example, the foundations of fast fashion. Zara, today it might be Shein, right? H&M. You are just a consumer. You consume fast fashion. And basically, the more clothes they can stuff down your throat, all right, the better it is for the company, the more you consume, right? But it's kind of that sort of that sin of gluttony, right? Where we overconsume and we just overfeed, because that's the problem with the Industry 3.0 model. It arrives at a point of it's not sustainable. And I'm not trying to say the word sustainable yet in the sense of environmental preachiness. I'm just saying we literally just can't consume, right? My parents and grandparents were in fashion. And, my parents were at a point, even in the 90s, we're starting to talk about who uses all these clothes, right? What do we do with all these clothes, right? And if we look at what happened in the fashion industry, what's now happening is what might be called pre-loved items, right? And so items that have basically been worn before and are being upcycled, recycled, whatever the language is. But basically, it's not just about going to buy new clothes all the time. You're using clothing that's been used before, right? And so that's, in that sense, an example of a transition to a prosumer. The customer is no longer just turning up and wants the cheapest t-shirt that they can possibly get. They are proactively thinking about what's the environmental impact in this? Was this ethically made, right? And their voice has been heard by the producer, and that's why they're changing their production habits. So there's a feedback loop between the person who is engaged with using the product or service and the one who's producing it. So in a very straightforward way, a consumer, you have a company and you draw an arrow to the consumer, and that's it. It's a one-way relationship. And what you think as a consumer doesn't matter, and we don't care if you buy it or you don't buy it at the end. Whereas in the prosumer model, it's imagine the prosumer and the company, and there's a feedback loop. So an arrow goes to the prosumer, but the prosumer also sends an arrow back to the company. And it's not just about whether you make the buying decision or not. Your opinion about about how it should be produced, right? Is it ethical? Is it moral? Is it sustainable? And from an environmental point of view, right? That all starts to play a much bigger role. Now, but we can also see this in the micro level when you're building an innovation inside an organization. You might have a fantastic idea, and you may well think it's fantastic, but the people you're trying to help may not think it's very fantastic, right? And so whereas before in corporate innovation, people would build stuff and they're passionately trying to build a better world, but they would just produce a new process, a new product, and then they just dump it on the people they're trying to help and say, don't worry, I'm here to save you. I've helped you. It's like that Star Wars meme, right? Do not be alarmed. You're being saved while you're also being beaten up, right? So what that then means is that not very useful innovation is being created in the sense of the word. It's not useful. So what is happening is when we work with our clients, we emphasize that leadapreneurs need to think of them as prosumers. Yes, you have an idea for making things better, But let's imagine, Hannah, I'm the leadapreneur and you're the person I'm trying to help, right? We're on the same business team together and we're stuck with this process. It takes 8 hours and we want to make it 8 minutes. Okay, I have an idea for how we can do that. We go from Excel to dashboards and we put some basic automation models in place. Cool. But then I come to you and I say, hey, Hannah, what do you think about this digital mockup? Do you like it? Do you not? And you give me lots of feedback. I'm like, hey, those are some great points I hadn't even thought about. So I then change it and I change my design, right? And then I do build a minimum viable product and I test it out with you. And then I get some more feedback from you. And then I go to speak to my seniors and then I get some more feedback from them. And then I again change my innovation now, and then I start to partially deploy it. And then as we partially deploy it, we realize, oh, there's an issue with compliance we hadn't even thought about. So I go out to them and then I get their feedback. And so what all these people are doing is they're being involved in a conversation about the journey of the innovation. It's not Jan is just on his own heroically built something and just puts it out there. And it seems so simple, right? It just seems that, yeah, you just talk to people and listen to their feedback. But you actually have to do it and actually listen to their feedback, right? And that's what's tricky, because once you start asking people for feedback and they start saying, you know what, we don't want our clothes to be made by, very low income children in faraway countries. We want, fair labor practices. We want sustainable cotton. We want these things. And you're like, oh shit, this is really going to affect my business model. Oh, you know what? Let's just not listen to them anymore, right? That's the inconvenient thing, because the great thing about the consumption model and the customer is you just get to tell them how it's going to be. Whereas when you're inviting a prosumer in for dialogue, for it to be serious, you have to actually listen to them and change your behaviors and ways of working and doing things to factor in their feedback. And they want to see it. They want to see on the label, this is sustainably made, right? This is ethically made. And if then using the fashion example, then they're also going to check, is it actually fashionably, ethically made? Because there's a lot of greenwashing, right? And so the whole concept of a business has to reorientate itself around the idea you're in continuous dialogue with the people that you're serving. And this transitions at a very fundamental level, the model of capitalism away from a consumption economy, I produce, you consume, that's it, to really this community model, right? Where we are producing, let's say, for example, clothing, right? And you are wearing my clothing, but you're then talking to me about how you want that clothing to be made. I want it to be more ethical. I want it to be made more sustainably. I want you maybe to include these colors and these trends, right? Or this technology. And then I listen to you and I produce it and I give it back to you. And you're like, oh, wow, that's great. You listen to me. I love it, right? And then that builds these feedback loops. And that's how you then secure your position in the marketplace as a company in Industry 4.0, is you build these communities of practice around a way of working. And then you have to protect that with trust and integrity and honor and not violate it, because otherwise people will think you're full of shit and they'll leave and go somewhere else.
Okay, so if I have to summarize the point in one sentence, would be the difference is the feedback loop. So in a consumer model, you don't have the feedback. In the prosumer model, you have the feedback loop.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And
So
as part of that, but as the moderator, it's not one feedback loop. It's continuous feedback loops. So this is what gets tricky. It's not, oh, I asked them once and they said this, never mind, whatever. You have to integrate the feedback into your modus operandi and change it. It's not just I send you information, you send me information, I ignore you, I keep doing what I'm doing. That's not it.
That's what you do.
I reserve the right to be the supreme leader.
Okay, but you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the advanced communication skills that you created, and there is a communication feedback loop there. And I think we could sort of tweak that for the prosumer model.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really sort of what is the idea of a feedback loop, is the foundation of the science of cybernetics, which is the foundation of all Industry 4.0 technology. Just that very idea of the loop. And it seems so simple, but understanding this loop and mastering it and putting it into a practice is what changes everything. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And we say communication, right? Oh yeah, we just need to communicate. But I continuously am amazed at the vast realm that communication actually is. Your state of consciousness is actually a conversation of communication, right? Our consciousness here is existing because we are conversing together in communication. If there is no communication, there is no consciousness. Consciousness exists in the flow of information. And so the flow of information inside the organization, the way it is communicating, also what it's not communicating about, right, determines the state of consciousness of that organization, in fact, of any entity. So understanding that communication is about information flows, and those information flows structure the states of consciousness is just such a powerful idea in terms of understanding the nature of reality that we experience. And what often happens inside organizations, especially the management bureaucracy, is, we know because of silos and various other phenomena inside the management bureaucracy that information does not flow. And that's why essentially many organizations that are management bureaucracies operate in a slightly retarded sense. And that's because the information isn't flowing, right? They're being blocked. And so they're acting really, really foolishly, right? And they're doing really, really ridiculously silly things because they're not flowing the information. And so that's why, if you want to have one measure of the state of consciousness of an organization or an individual, look at their communication flows. Right? An individual who's communicating at a high state of communication, right? Authentic communication, true what they're saying, complex language. They're engaging in talking about challenges and opportunities, right? The richness of the conversation determines the state of consciousness there. And so in many ways, moving into an Industry 4.0 organization where we're taking in the fact that, the organizations exist to serve their customers in Industry 3.0 language, you're existing to serve your prosumer. But you can only do that if you can cultivate honest conversation and real conversation. And you can't just whitewash it or greenwash it with PR to be sustainably successful in the long term. In the short term, of course you can. But over the long term, you just become delusional because you don't understand what's really going on. And so that's why communication is such a vital part of success in Industry 4.0. And that is to be understood as it's about the flow of information and how information flows structure the consciousness of that area. It could be an individual, a team, a department, or the entire organization. And, ultimately, and this is sort of the foundational idea of Leadapreneur, is that consciousness determines capability. It's not resource scarcity. It's your state of consciousness that determines what you're capable of. And so to have more advanced capability, you must elevate states of consciousness. So if we want to elevate states of consciousness, there's a whole bunch of things that need to be done. But one of them is to dramatically improve communication flows, information flows, and the way we communicate that. And not just one-off, right? But the consistency with which we're doing that. And so these small little principles, once you magnify them and scale them, and it's particularly if you iterate them over time, if you iterate the loops, it completely changes everything. Right? You basically change capitalism from moving from a consumer model to a prosumer model. That one decision to make a feedback loop out of it completely changes everything in capitalism, because you now have to serve those communities and you're accountable. The feedback loop creates accountability and responsibility that wasn't there before. And that in turn changes your practices.
So what I get from this conversation is if you improve your communication within your organization, then that will enable you to have a prosumer model in a way, to change your business toward a more prosumer model rather than a consumer model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, but actually I would say is perhaps maybe, yes, that can be one way to do it. Another way can also be to say, if we want to be successful, we need to see our customers as prosumers. And that means we now need to go out and start listening to them. And when we listen to them, we need to say, because they're not just going to say these brilliant things and everyone's like, oh my God, wow, this prosumer is so enlightened. We are now going to listen to everything they say. It doesn't work like that, right? You have to.
But I think it starts at a fundamental level, Jan. As you said earlier, if you have it in your organization that you listen to one another and you have that feedback loop within the organization, and it's easier for you to start listening to a prosumer, right? Because if you don't have it, if you're listening to employees and then it's just like supreme leader sort of a model, then you don't really transit to that side.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely one, true for some realities, right? The challenge is going to be, realistically, an organization that doesn't listen to employees is not going to start listening to employees, because they're just not. They just don't care. They don't have that culture, right? But what they might start listening to is the people who's paying them and ensuring their existence.
Could be.
Because again, it's, repetition is reality, right? So it's not like, oh, we listened to our employees once. We did an employee survey and we heard them and, it's great, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about continuous iterated information loops. And so that is hard. That's very hard to do. It's expensive, it's difficult, it's time consuming, it's a pain in the ass because you actually have to listen and change, right? Like, so you need to be mobilize significant resource to do this. And, if you're in an organization that's not mobilizing significant resource to listen to your employees, you're not just going to start doing that because you're not going to see the ROI straight away. Whereas if you are really paying attention to your customers and what they're really doing and thinking, then, there is a much greater opportunity for ROI. And so, the different paths are possible, right? There's many different, all paths, I have some sense of possibility, but I do think that what's most likely is to use the business imperative of making sure we continue to have customers by serving them well. And the way we need to serve them is to actually listen to them. And then most importantly, act on that listening to change our behaviors to be better for them. And that really, people talk about being adaptive, right? It's not the strongest or the smartest that survive. It's the fittest, right? That's the essence of evolutionary theory. What drives fitness? It's about your ability to adapt. What drives adaptability? It's the information loops. The faster you can listen to your environment and understand what's going on, the faster you can change yourself and respond into that, and you can adapt. The definition of adaptation is essentially communication. Adaptation occurs because you listen to the external environment, you recognize there's a change, you change yourself to meet that change, and then you express that forth, right?
But what if you are not able to what if you're not in an environment that's giving you those feedback? Let's just say a company that was created in the 1990s, they have the set of employees that's been the same, they have a set of consumer that's been the same, and then they are just all of them in that same environment, in that same container, and they're not sort of being able to give feedback that would change them from one model to another. So what do you do in that case?
Well, that's not what's actually happening. The data is always available, right? It's like when companies say, oh, it suddenly happened out of nowhere. No, it didn't. Nothing happens out of nowhere. You just weren't paying any attention to it. Your radar was blind, right? Things don't just suddenly appear. There is always cause and effect, right? We don't live in this totally magical world, right? There is magic in some sense, but there's a cause for it, right? And so using that example, they just weren't paying attention. They're not paying attention to the changing environment. And the reason why they didn't pay attention is because they don't care. And this is why care is so important, because it's care that brings your consciousness into the here and now and says, what do I care about? What am I going to really pay attention to? And then not just pay attention to, but then mobilize myself around, right? And so what basically has happened is many organizations have found these comfortable niches where they didn't need to care, because they are in an oligopoly, or they have a technological advantage in that moment, right? And so they can just keep doing what they're doing, but the world moves on, and you're not caring about the world moving on. You're not caring about what's paying attention. You're just caring about yourself, caring about your organization and maintaining your status quo. And that means inevitably you're going to die because you're just small and the world is big, and you will no longer fit the environment, and the world moves on. And so, and all of this will always keep coming back to this one simple idea of the feedback loop of information. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the science of cybernetics, because once you really get this loop or start to get it, it's like you gain the magic key to understand so much of reality, because it's always driven by these loops.
Well, I had another question, but I think I'll keep that for next discussion. So let's hear a summary from you. Okay, what the summary I have on my notes here is, we need to, if you want to succeed in the prosumer model, you need to create a community of practice. You need to have communication in your organization. And yeah, what summary do you have for us so that our listeners can take away from this podcast?
I think that's lovely. I would just add to that is to then go deeper in, and that's why we have an advanced communication skills course. Like, communication is not just sharing information. It's about acting on information. So it's about iterating the loop, iterating the active information. So that means, okay, I share with Hannah, Hannah shares with me. What now? Well, I need to listen to Hannah, and Hannah needs to listen to Jan, so that we then exchange, we send it up, again, we run another loop, and then we listen, and then we act on that input, and then we send another loop and another loop and another loop. And so really communication is about the iteration of these information loops. And for information to continue to be, for communication to be successful, we need to integrate the response into our being, our identity, and then express that response out. We can't just ignore it. And that is, I think, really strikes to the heart of what is particularly challenging. It's, yeah, you did your employee survey, but what are you actually going to change? Right? What's actually going to be different here? And how, that is that kind of idea. Yeah, you've asked your customers what they want, but then how are you going to do things differently, right? And so it's really understanding that ability to iterate communication through time and be responsive to it that lies at the heart of organizational success today. Because if you don't have communication flows, you're just going to become delusional. You're not going to understand what's going on. And maybe the final point here is you can see this I think very clearly now in Russia, right? What Russia, President Putin generally believed he was going to be able to invade Ukraine, conquer all of that, and probably a large part of the rest of Eastern Europe. And he's just delusional about that. The guy is completely delusional, right? And yet he's probably one of the most powerful, maybe smart, certainly one of the wealthiest men on earth, maybe in human history. Why is he delusional, right? Why is he not getting this? Because his communication flows are poor. He's not getting the real information. So he doesn't understand what reality is really about. He's desynchronized, and therefore he's being unable to be effective in it. And so this active communication really ultimately comes down to, that's what's going to enable you to survive, and it's what's going to enable you to succeed. And so making communication in the sense of it being an iterated dialogue at the core of the way in which you build your culture is so important for Industry 4.0 success. That's what gives you agility. It's what gives you adaptability. And so I really encourage everyone to really master this essential capability, because that's what's going to lead you to be able to thrive in this new age.
And to help you guys, we'll be putting the link for the course down in the podcast and our YouTube channel for you to have an access to it if you want to take the course. So on this note, Jan, thank you for your time. And I would like to remind our listeners to believe in yourself, be brave, be bold, be brilliant, and build your better world. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Leadapreneurs YouTube channel to get your weekly updates.